The Jujutsu Kaisen community is plagued with Sukuna fraud allegations at the moment, but I want to debunk this idea that Sukuna is a fraud because I think that is a ridiculous claim if I'm totally honest. But let's set the scene of where these allegations came from. Round 1 of Sukuna vs Gojo was primarily a domain battle. In chapter 229 of Jujutsu Kaisen, Gojo unleashed Unlimited Void for probably the 4th or 5th time, and previously his domain had been destroyed by Malevolent Shrine, but this time it was different. Gojo managed to unleash Unlimited Void 0.01 seconds faster than Sukuna could open his domain, and hence he won this domain battle. And Sukuna was finally hit by Unlimited Void for the first time in their battle. Sukuna was frozen by the infinite amount of information, however he still managed to summon Mahoraga. Now what is important is that Sukuna had likely been hiding Mahoraga's wheel in the shadows, adapting to Unlimited Void the entire time. This meant that Mahoraga had already adapted to Unlimited Void and hence he destroyed Gojo's domain. We later find out that Sukuna wasn't even damaged by Unlimited Void and it was instead Megumi who took the sure hit of the domain. The only problem is that Sukuna himself hasn't adapted to Unlimited Void, so if Gojo was to open up his domain again, then he would need Mahoraga to destroy it, otherwise he would be hit. So this is where the fraud allegations originate from. But first things first, let's break down what this actually means for Sukuna. Sukuna quite literally made Gojo use Unlimited Void over and over again to adapt to it, as well as making sure that each time it was damaging Gojo's brain. The reason Gojo sustained damage to the point where he couldn't open his domain anymore was because Gojo had to replenish the part of his brain where he burnt out his domain use. So part of his brain is actually where the domain is located, and every time he opens that domain, the cursed energy in that location is gone. So Gojo destroys that part of his brain, replenishes it using reverse curse technique, but obviously we find out that this isn't good for his brain and eventually he's not going to be able to open his domain anymore. Domains are very complicated and exhausting techniques, and many users can only unleash their domain once or twice a day. So with Gojo unleashing his domain this many times, Sukuna was fully aware that Gojo couldn't do it again. And before any of you say Sukuna didn't know that Gojo couldn't use it again, if you read chapter 229, you will see that Sukuna says you can't open your domain before Gojo even does the hand signs for it. This wasn't Sukuna being a fraud, Sukuna just used his advanced knowledge of Jujutsu from thousands and thousands of fights with sorcerers to know the limits of an individual. Now I don't really think that true Jujutsu Kaisen fans are of the same belief that Sukuna is a fraud, but I think the reason that this has become such a common thing for people to say is because Sukuna might actually end up beating Gojo. Basically, before this fight, I hadn't even considered the possibility of Sukuna beating Gojo, as I thought Gojo was far superior to Sukuna. But when you look at the narrative importance of Gojo dying or losing in this battle, as well as Sukuna winning to go on to fighting the other sorcerers, I think it's time to accept that Gojo dying isn't a bad thing. I think a lot of people don't want to accept that Gojo isn't necessarily the strongest sorcerer of all time anymore. Because if Sukuna wins, then a lot of people will say that he is stronger than Gojo. Jujutsu Kaisen fans often much prefer Gojo to Sukuna, and I too like Gojo significantly more than Sukuna. But I saw someone in my comments say that Gojo needs to die so the Jujutsu sorcerers can show their true colours, or something along those lines. Essentially, Gojo needs to lose this battle in order for every other character to be able to have their fights and show how strong they have become as a character. I think that this idea is a lot of copium towards the fact that Sukuna can actually beat Gojo, which a lot of people thought was impossible. But just to debunk this entire theory even more, we have to go back a little while to around chapter 210. Sukuna used his advanced knowledge of the soul to take over Megumi's body. He did this for two reasons. Megumi had much worse control over his soul compared to Yuji, meaning Sukuna can suppress Megumi much easier. This was shown when Sukuna took countless measures to make sure that Megumi could no longer interfere with Sukuna's power, like he did with Sukuna vs Yuji. The second reason Sukuna took over Megumi's body rather than staying in Yuji's is because Yuji doesn't have his own innate curse technique. On the contrary, Megumi has a broken curse technique, the 10 Shadows, where like all of you know, he can summon Shikigami from the shadows. This gives Sukuna access to an arsenal of Shikigami, one of them being Mahoraga, which is the strongest Shikigami to ever exist. Sukuna can also significantly amp the 10 Shadows technique by imbuing his cursed energy to make the Shikigami he summons even stronger. The power of the Shikigami summoned using this technique scales to the amount of cursed energy the user puts in. So Sukuna, knowing that he probably has the most cursed energy in the entire series, knew that Megumi would be the perfect vessel for him, especially when it comes to defeating Gojo. Sukuna literally just uses innate curse technique to his advantage. And I really don't see how using your own innate curse technique can make you a fraud. It's like me saying Gojo is a fraud for inheriting the 6 eyes, and then using that in battle, just because he inherited it and it isn't his own technique. Or even closer to what Sukuna did, Kenjaku is not a fraud for taking over Geto and other countless bodies and using their curse technique. And I believe that if Kenjaku surpassed Gojo, then even he would be called out as a fraud. So it's clear that if somebody doesn't organically surpass Gojo, then the fandom won't accept it. Which to me sounds like a huge coping measure to deal with the fact that the person many viewed as an untouchable force falling from his pedestal. But let's be totally honest here, Sukuna wasn't even losing entirely without Mahoraga. One interpretation is that Sukuna may have allowed Gojo to unleash Unlimited Void that final time so Mahoraga could fully adapt. During this battle, Sukuna has outmatched Gojo in all but one domain battle. He has forced Gojo to spam reverse curse technique due to the sheer amount of damage he is dealing to Gojo, which has inevitably caused Gojo to damage his own brain. Sukuna has been forced to use simple domains without even being able to use his curse technique for the most part, and on top of this, he hasn't even unleashed his true curse technique, and he has still fought on par if not exceeded Gojo. In hand-to-hand combat, they have almost fought as equals, with Gojo only taking the slight edge at some parts. But the one time Sukuna uses Mahoraga has now brandished his character as a fraud. You can't just forget the rest of Sukuna's feats because of that one moment. Sukuna is a mastermind when it comes to battle IQ. It seems that Sukuna was thought to come into this fight as a challenger, but he's proving to everyone that they have underestimated him, and our way of dealing with the fact that Sukuna has come into this fight more prepared is making him out to be a fraud. But that is all for this rant / discussion. If you did enjoy this video, then make sure to smash that like button. And if you are enjoying my content at the moment, then make sure to subscribe, as it helps out my channel a lot. And your guys' support means so much to me. If you guys want to add anything to what I've said in the video, then make sure to leave it in the comments down below. I read all your comments and thank you all for the support. But with that all said, I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.